So what is the highest dividend yield ETF right now in Australia? I just went and had a look at all the major top fund managers. I'm talking Russell Investments, Vanguard, State Street, Van Eck. I went and had a look at them all and looked specifically for their high dividend ETFs. Now, some of these aren't specifically dividend or income ETFs. Some of them just have high dividend yields. First of all, which one had the highest yield? And also, which one are probably worth your time if you're looking for a dividend ETF to invest in. So how I did my research, all of the dividend yield information is from marketindex.com.au. I just kind of like how they calculate the dividend yield. I did go to CommSec to look at the past dividends, what they've paid in the past, and also what the management fees are. And of course, my favorite way to work out how much the stock has increased or how much the value of the stock, or in this case, the ETF, has increased over the last 5 years, I went to my favorite website, Google. It's just the easiest way to find this out. So let's jump into the research and I'll show you what I found. So here's the information that I've found. It's sorted right now in highest dividend yield to lowest. I have included some that didn't quite make 5%. They were still pretty decent dividend yields anyway. As you can see, some of them decreased in value over the last 5 years and some of them went up. And we have some really high management fees down to really low management fees based on how active the fund is or how passive, how they're following an index or not. Some of these are just general ETFs and they're not dividend specific, but they all have pretty decent dividend yields and then for a variety of different fund managers. So for the sake of making things easier, let's just delete all of those ETFs that didn't have a positive return over the last 5 years. If you're losing money on the money that you put in on the capital, then I don't think it's a good ETF. Here's our list of just the companies that had a positive return over the last 5 years. Some of them only by a little bit, and some of them, such as the beta shares, resources sector, had a really high return. Now, out of these, I probably like the last three, even though they have the lowest dividend yields, and I'll show you why they're more consistent. Now, because I always say, just because something has a high dividend yield does not mean it's worth your investment. If you had invested $10,000 5 years ago, how much dividends would you have received based on the data that I found in CommSec on what they actually paid? Now, of course, it would be much easier for me to look into the future, into my crystal ball, and tell you if you invested $10,000 now, what you would get in the future, because there's not a lot you can do. You can't go back in time and invest $10,000 5 years ago, but it's the only data I have because my crystal ball isn't working. And as we know, past performance isn't a guarantee of future performance, but it does show you that some ETFs are more consistent and more reliable than others. Let's go and see how much dividends you would have received over the past 5 years, assuming you put no extra money in and you weren't reinvesting the dividends. So this is how much dividends you would have received over the last 5 years if you had purchased $10,000 worth of the ETF. Now, the first column is the price it was 5 years ago. I took the closing price. The next is, that's how many shares you would have got. We've got two columns for 2019, 2020, 2021, and so on. First column is how much they paid throughout that entire year per share. That's how much dividends you would have received in 2019 if you held that ETF. Now, where I got these figures from is CommSec. So those are where I got those figures. And this total is how much dividends you would have received in total over the last 5 years. The highest being OZR, you would have received over 4,235, and the lowest being VAS, where you would have received 2,452. Now, you'll see some of the larger ones actually paid really high in 2022, but that's not consistent with how they usually pay, especially with OZR and QRE, which are both resources sector ETFs, but they haven't been truly consistent in how much they've paid. If you were holding them in 2022, you would have got a really sweet, nice dividend. I thought it might be interesting if we also had a look at what the capital growth was and add it to the totals. So I'm going to do that now. And we'll make those dollar amounts. So that's the capital growth, which is just the capital growth, adding the dividends. Okay, so having a look at that with capital growth and with dividends, The highest what you would have received is QRE, which is the resources sector, which doesn't surprise me because the resources sector has done really well. Resources is very cyclical though, so take that with a grain of salt. It may not be as high going forward. And if we look at VHY, which is the most popular dividend ETF, you would have made about 2,800, just over 2,800 in dividends and nearly 2,000 in capital growth, which means your investment after 5 years just under $4,800. So yeah, I hope you found that interesting. So what dividend ETFs are your favorites? And have you got any of the ones that I've included in this video? Anyway, I hope you found this information useful. I actually had a lot of fun doing the research on this one, particularly going back and looking how much you would have made if you had have invested $10,000 5 years ago. I always find that quite interesting. Anyway, I hope you have a great week, a great weekend, a great month. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.